story is called Narcissus. Speak up if you can't hear me. For some reason, the microphone is prone to drift if I'm not careful. Beautiful rooms full of light and fire, and everyone pretending not to look at me. I was much desired by rich boys with their hearts breathily on their sleeves. Rich men's wives do nage satin and rather a lot of coal. Urbane and athletic Athenians who spoke of friendship and excellence. Spendthrifty wine factors whose chins trembled when I breathed on them. They offered gifts, which I accepted, and verses, which were always the same. I was perfect, moving and unmoved, and flawless as stone, and the like. I never let them touch me, but I gave them every chance to sigh. I'd been in Sybaris forever, it seemed, sleeping through the days and passing the nights in an endless succession of identical parties that left no more lasting impression than reflected voices, repeated conversations, wine fumes, claustrophobia. I had friends, or rather, people I drank with, all of whom found inexhaustible delight in the company of louche musicians, noblemen in thin disguise, fire dancers, fire eaters, slaves with interesting histories, the more articulate sort of whore. In the false dawn, on the way home, when the wine was fading, I knew that it was perilous to stay too long, that the demi-monde must have a term, that it was, in fact, a banal, mediocre bohemia, but it was home, if home was anywhere, and when I tried to focus on another future, my mind wandered. One night there was a party where someone quenched all the torches and left us fumbling in the dark, which delighted most of the celebrants, judging by the whispers and the laughter. Unseen strangers groped me and moved on. I had never liked to be touched and was searching for a place out of the flow when a hand closed on my wrist. The fingers were calloused and the ragged, broken nails dug into my skin. "Who is it?" I asked and tried to pull away, but whoever it was strong, and I found I could smell him, his sweat and unwashed clothes and something metallic. Behind us, a bonfire roared into life, and I found myself looking into the face of an old man, a stranger, scars where his eyes had been. He said, "Narcissus, loveliest of men, fear mirrors." I was going to ask him why, for I had seen mirrors and been none the worse for it, though privately I thought my reputation for beauty was exaggerated. But there was a shriek of laughter behind me, and I turned to see a girl standing by the fire with a clique of notably bitchy actors. She was dressed like they were, and stood like them, so much the thespian that I thought at first she must be a boy in drag. But no. There were breasts, or the beginnings of them. She was about 13. She stood between Thyestes the tragedian, who had a patronizing arm around her shoulders, and Bagoas, nobleman and occasional libertine, who was making a show of looking out into the crowd while his attention was on the girl. Thyestes made most of his money off the stage. She doesn't know what's going to happen, I thought. She caught my eye and smiled almost convulsively. I nodded to her and turned away, but the blind man was already lost in the press of bodies, and instead I found Artabazos, nominal playwright and gossip extraordinaire. "Who's the little thing with the actors?" I asked. "Ah, the ingenue? Echo is her name. Echo from the provinces. Echo had a lover, her first, you see. Rich family, vehement objections, but they had plenty of daughters, and it was easier to let her go. He dropped her, of course, and she washed up here. Thyestes found her sitting in an alley, filthy and sodden, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. At first she wouldn't speak, and insisted she was nothing, known and nameless. But now, as you can see, she's very much at home." He paused, emotion moving over his face like weather. "Come home and have a drink with me, my dear. I have more to tell you," he said, standing too close, vinous and flushing. "My excellent friend, I'm afraid I can't go home with you. The truth is, I don't like you very much, and you're too poor to be worth deceiving." Someone next to me laughed wheezily. I was regarded as a wit on the basis of such remarks, though what I had said was no more than the truth. The party faded, as parties will, and it was too hot and too dark in the many low rooms, so I decided to go home. But while I was looking for an exit, I found myself in a balcony where Bagoas held the girl, Echo, in a sprawling embrace. I would have left them, but I saw the rigor in her face, how she clutched her arms to her chest, how her shirt was half torn away. "If I have a principle, it's that tricks should be treated genteelly," I said. "Bagoas, you are a pompous and mediocre nobody. No one likes you very much, and you are welcome only when you're paying, though you seem not, till now, to have realized it. Also, you're often impotent, so why don't you leave the girl and go practice reading your horses, or better yet, your dogs? Such spectacular rudeness can overwhelm the unprepared, but Zachary, to his credit, I suppose, and glared at me, fumbled for his dagger, and stood. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't, as in fact I was never afraid. Though I couldn't observe why, I was no warrior. I put on the expressionless mask I wore when I wanted to drop an admirer, and said, "The captain of the Praetorians said he'd do anything for a smile from me. What do you think he'd do to you if I gave him a kiss? I'm thinking something with hot iron and a saw." I smiled pleasantly and watched his face, wondering what would happen next. He gave me a look intended to convey that this wasn't over, but one day he would find me, and etc., and stalked away. Echo had neither moved nor blinked. I arranged the remnants of her shirt over her frightfully skinny shoulders and said, "These people, no manners, very disagreeable." "These people," she said, in a voice radiant with detachment and inflected with contempt and just a little mirth that, after a moment, I recognized as a fair imitation of my own. "No manners, very disagreeable." I laughed and asked if she'd been hurt, by which I meant raped. She only looked at me wide-eyed, her need almost palpable, so I stood, murmured what was no doubt good advice, and left. There were other stations in the night, but when the sky was lightening, I finally went home. I lived on a posh tree-lined avenue where drunks and vagrants were relatively rare, so I was surprised to see someone curled up on my doorstep, apparently asleep, sucking her thumb. It was the girl. I prodded her with my toe and said, "You, wake up." She opened her eyes, and I said, "I'm no one's gallant, and I'm not running an orphanage or a brothel, so go home, or, as the case may be, away." She blinked back tears, and then, in the haughty, weary drawl of an empress addressing a beggar, she advised me to go and practice raping my horses, or, better yet, my dogs. I said, "I have neither horses nor dogs, my dear, so it'll have to be you," and squinted at her with such carnal menace as I could muster. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, considering, and I was about to say something else when she launched herself at me, locking her arms around my waist, her fragile warmth pressed into me, and though I recoiled, I do not like to be touched, and even my most munificent admirers by themselves only a prolonged agony. She wouldn't drop the embrace, despite my exasperated sighs and ostentatious throat clearing, and, finally, I returned it. My house was large, but I only used 2 rooms, so she had her pick of empty ones. I had almost no furniture, so I made her a bed from a pile of my furs and told her she'd sleep like a Scythian princess. I sent the maid out for food, which echoed with distressing avidity, and for wine, which I watered when she wasn't looking, and which she matched me cup for cup. I asked her about herself, where she was from, who her parents were, and what had happened with Thyestes, but she only smiled at me and wouldn't say a word. It was good to have a pet. She'd be sprawled waiting on pillows in the foyer when I came home from an assignation. I'd show her the hall from that night's admirer, and we'd rate it for taste and extravagance. I let her decide how nice I'd be the next time I saw them, and we talked, or rather, I talked, though I was not naturally loquacious, but she encouraged me, and somehow I told her everything I knew. I had my tailor cut my old clothes to fit her. I put jewels on her earlobes, and on her wrists, and on her clavicles. She wasn't beautiful, but her face was broad and blank, all strong planes and shadows. She was an empty canvas for my brush, and I painted her face as I painted my own. We looked like twins when I was done, or lovers, or both. We were lovely. When we went out, all eyes were on us. Everyone wondered if I had taken a lover, finally, which was good for business, as it gave the marks hope. She was a great social asset, chattering tirelessly while I was stupefied with boredom, and if her opinions were second-hand, she had overheard a great many and delivered them with brio and conviction. We finished each other's sentences, and ate from the same plate, and she draped herself around me. We made a point of snubbing Thyestes. I welcomed each night, and all the nights blurred together, and she was always close by. I thought those nights would never end, and somehow, at the same time, that we'd leave one day and live together far away, in a quiet house by a river, and never come back to the city. Some governor's son paid court to her, which I tolerated, though I insisted that she stay intact, for I wanted neither a screaming infant nor a spotty aristocrat in the household. When he became importunate, I told her to drop him, but she said she didn't know how. There's nothing to it, I said. Just look into his eyes and say, nothing. What's wrong? He'll ask. Are you angry? He'll apologize for imaginary slights, for stinginess, for other lovers. Do you hate me? He'll ask. Have I taught you to despise me? Why won't you talk to me? His sad mouth will tremble, and if he's not really a gentleman, there may be tears and harsh words, and then it's over. Nemesis was a frightful goddess whose name was rarely spoken, and the good burghers of Sugrus would have been shocked to learn that there was a party in her temple, which was, I suppose, why we were there. The space made me uncomfortable, all footsteps and shadows, and never enough light. It was too dim to see faces, but I recognized Roxana, a minor royal, from her slouch. Roxana looked a bit rough, preferring beards and scars to smooth chins and clean lines. She had, to my certain knowledge, fought her way through the entire Praetorium. We were chummy. It was a long way from her to a throne, though never far to a bar stool, but she still had the high palace manner and their breathy, lisping drawl. Slumming, dear? I asked. Oh no, said Roxana. These are quite my people, salt of the earth, and so on. Who's your little friend? Echo, lately of an alley, lifted up her hand to be kissed. I had never been in that temple before, and as they talked, my eyes drifted up the statue of Nemesis, larger than life, and her face wasn't what I expected, full of wild pride and terror and desperation. And when I looked back, Echo and Roxana were gone. I searched through the temple, but found only strangers who ignored me. I had thought she'd be waiting at home, but when I got there, the house was empty. I waited up for her, supposing she left the party to find her lover, but dawn came, still she wasn't there, and finally I fell asleep on her pillows. I woke in the evening, but she still hadn't come back, so I went out looking, but I found nothing that night, or the next night, or the night after that, and I hardly slept, and I kept thinking I saw her and being disappointed. And finally, at some nobleman's fete, I found Artabazus drunk on a divan, and he said he hadn't seen Echo, but he had seen Roxana, who had a new friend, a protege, who was little more than a girl. And it wasn't Echo, I said. No, it wasn't your gutter snipe. I haven't found out her name yet, but she was clearly of one of the great houses of Persia, not at all your kind. I floated my way into the palace and waited motionless in the shadows. The shadows of the orangery near Roxana's rooms, watching the courtiers come and go, and when Echo finally walked by in her aristocrat's disguise, I hardly recognized her. Echo? I called, sick with relief, but she didn't slow, and I had to run to lay a hand on her shoulder. You might have told me you were going to be away. I know how it is, obviously, so go have your run, but then come home. I smiled at her, but she stared at me without expression. Oh, I see, I said. Your new connection with the third-rate demi-royal has put you above speaking. Don't let me detain you. By all means, return to your proper palace. Or was it an alley? Her face was unmoving, her eyes cold. Have I offended you? Neglected you? Is there anything I haven't done for you? Look, have your prince, or your princess, or all the royals in a row, for all I care. But then come back, because it's us against everyone, and we'll take what they have and give them nothing in return, and love only each other. So come home. Echo? I said, but she was already walking away, and I realized then that I had been wrong, that she had always been beautiful. I looked for her a long time. They barred me from the palace, but it didn't matter, because from what I heard, she didn't last there long. I went to parties high and low, sipped at every dive, flophouse, and brothel, every place where the discarded might wash up, but she was never there, and I rarely slept, and drank too much, and ate too much poppy. My new round must have been hard on me, because all the acquaintances started when they saw me, and I finally heeded this year's advice and stayed away from mirrors. I started waking up in places I didn't know, and the recent past was riddled with dark stretches. And one day it was winter, and I was looking for her by the freezing river outside the city wall, but it had been a long time since I had eaten, and though it was a bright, frigid day when I closed my eyes, it was twilight when I opened them, and there was another river before me, this one swift and black and smooth as glass. I peered into the flow, and my heart lifted for a moment when I thought I saw her looking up at me.